I'd like to shift gears to talk about your new book, and uh, and uh, and that book focuses on exile, which is, I think, another aspect of your reflections on the prophetic. And to do that, and to help me, to join me in the conversation, to talk about your book, I have asked three people uh, to uh, uh, to read your book and to share their reactions and their thoughts about
Thank you.
the book.
Thank you very much. First of all, Professor, happy birthday for today, and I wish you more birthdays to come and more writings in the future, challenging us regarding the courses of action needed to be taken regarding the struggles for justice and peace, particularly in the Jewish context. When Koy asked me to read this book, it was a struggle to do with all my teaching job and many congregational work that I have to engage. Yet I was able to find the little time to look into the reading and just to share some insights and probably some questions that nagged me regarding the book. Let me start off by affirming your search. You know, you have started in your book the name and the grappling of with the naming of the grappling with naming God. It's a fundamental question, and your book somehow indicates your desire not to control but rather to allow this God to unfold the reality that He wants you to realize. What I find quite difficult to grapple with your book is the style that you have approached it. You will always present two sides. There will be the positive, there will be a negative, there will be a bright side, there will be a negative side, and the reader would be thrown in. What now are you to come up with in your conclusion? And that is a nagging question that I have seen in the book, and for me, it is a very good approach, particularly when you deal with the whole question of standing on a solid ethical foundation. That there is nothing that can be concretized in terms of ethicity, in as much as there will always be two sides, and you have to maneuver and discover along the way how you would be able to respond, particularly given the context that you would like when you are somehow criticizing the Jewish, the Israel's, shift in its gears in its history from one of having experienced difficulties during the Holocaust to being a nation and now to being an oppressive nation to another people. And here is where you are thrown into a challenge wherein you have to come up with how I would, be able to make sense of the richness of our Jewish tradition, particularly in the question of justice and peace when the religiosity, quote unquote, has been corrupted in a system, particularly now experienced in Israel in its Ghettoization, as what you call, of the Palestinian people. Yet, what I see in the book, especially when you go into the dailiness of your life, that's one thing I like in your book, that you go through the rhythm of simply looking at little things that happen today, an encounter, even going to the shop, all of these events that you have articulated, and the journal that you have somehow, consistently put into writing your experiences. What I have somehow decided so is here is a man trying to seek, what it means to be authentically religious or a person with integrity as a person, seeking how he can be a prophet, where the prophetic voice can be heard, by looking at the dailiness of life. Yet the dailiness of life is not something that is there, that is left on its own. The beauty that you have put into your in your book is how you put in many of the dialogue partners. You have many of these. Many of them are contemplatives, none of them are Christians, and yet, this theological process. And I think you have said that earlier, that, in your desire to find the voice in the dailiness of your experience, you were able also to open up to the possibilities that there are other voices would speak probably of the same language that you are in a different perspective, or probably voices that you have not heard within you, and yet to allow these voices to speak to you. And there are many of them that you have written in your book. And for me, those, that approach is something that I can, to celebrate with you. There is something that probably this is my own reading, or probably my own stance, being a moral theologian, in the way that I would read uh, your your perspective regarding your refusal to participate in a Jewish life and culture that would be supportive of the state power that Israel is, exercising over the people of Israel. I think when we deal with the whole question of religious integrity or and religious authenticity, and to stand on a solid ground ethically or morally. At the heart of this is, I think, the search that we all long for to be human. And I think this desire in you to live this out and to live out the authentic humanity can only find its grounding in no less than thinking of the other. And you have rightly said that earlier, that there will always be the other to be the point of reference, so that even that extelic perspective and even that prophetic perspective that you would like to take will always be grounded not on my own, but always in the desire to seek what will be the good for the other. And I think that's where the prophetic tradition should be characteristically, to stand out. That it is in the course of our own grappling with our voices that this symphony of voices, which would bring about the true identity of this reality, quote unquote, that you don't want to name, God, would come about. That ultimately, when we have sought the good in the other or through the other, we have discovered this phenomenon or reality we might call God. And I think that is the role of the prophet, to be able to enter into the symphony of the word, trying to bring out or trying to reach out, so that here in the course of this, music of the world, we are able to find and discover that ultimately the good that we discover in the others is the discovery of the God that we all long for. That's how I would sum up the book. And it's a beautiful book, but it's a very difficult book to read if you're not familiar with the Jewish consciousness, which you represent truly in this book. Thank you very much, Professor, and happy birthday. No? And I really congratulate you for having this book. I also have another book that Coy sent me, plus your Liberation Theology book. Thank you very much.
Well, yeah, it's always interesting for people to talk about my book, something that I've written, because I experience it in another way. And as Father said, I go back and forth, and in my Chapel of Love. But I think the thing that's interesting too, what he talks about, that the prophetic voice is not only the voice of the prophet, but the encounter with the other. And that the other enters into the prophetic voice. So it isn't a single voice, the prophetic voice. And a lot of it's daily life. I like that emphasis too. People I meet on the beach during my walk, and they all have stories. And of course, for priests, they're dealing with mostly what we call ordinary people who have full lives of their own. but they're not writers or lecturers, and to pay attention to that and to interpret it. So I liked what Father saw in my, or heard in my book, and I understand it can be difficult at times.
Thank you.